Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Hi. I'm not used to lights. This is a little strange for me. My name is Kara McLaughlin. I'm the director here at the House of the Seven Gables, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. We got a full house, which is great, and I see just a few familiar faces and a lot of new ones, which is really, really nice for us. So I just want to welcome you all here. How many of you have actually visited the House of the Seven Gables before? Well, that's good. That's really good. So in addition to thanking you for all coming, I want to thank a few other organizations and people. The Salem Inn, Dick and Diane Pavick, are sponsors for our entire year this year. They were quite generous, and I want to make sure to thank them for their support. I also want to thank they're really, they're everywhere. So if you ever see them, if you know them, thank them for everything that they do. Ye Olde Pepper Candy has been a great partner of ours throughout the year, but especially today with Salem So Sweet. They sponsored our ice sculpture out front and all of the delicious treats that you had tonight. So I want to thank them. And then, of course, I want to thank the staff that helped hold this together, Julie Arison Bishop and Deb Costa, especially for tonight. And then we have some volunteers that you may have met at the door and or throughout, including Ann Sousa, April Saban, and Michelle and Gifford Campbell, sorry. So thank you for volunteering. So since I have so many new people here, I want to share a little bit about the House of the Seven Gables Settlement Association. A lot of people don't realize that's our full name. And we are a nonprofit that owns and operates an entire National Historic Landmark District that's made up of 7 houses, including, of course, the House of the Seven Gables, which is famous because of its connection to Nathaniel Hawthorne and the novel. It served as a setting for his famous novel. But what a lot of people don't realize is the history is a settlement house. A settlement house was a place that was part of the progressive era of the turn of the 20th century where social workers were going to live in the poor neighborhoods, primarily where immigrants were living, to help them learn English and gain job skills so that they could become employed. And the House of the Seven Gables was actually a settlement house as well, but a very unique one. Our founder, Caroline Emerton, in 1910, knowing the connections house to Nathaniel Hawthorne, opened it as a museum and used proceeds from admissions to fund settlement work for people living in this neighborhood. At the time, they were coming from Poland and Russia and Eastern Europe, and she provided them with classes, woodworking, English language cooking, also social opportunities, bands, theatrical programs. We've carried on this history of settlement work for over a century, and today we still offer adult ESL lessons, citizenship classes, summer school programs for elementary school students that are English language learners, and we also have a series of community conversations on the topic of immigration and immigration reform, which is open to the entire community. So I hope to see some of you at some of those. So. So moving on to tonight, I think you're all excited, as excited as I am, to see this performance of Dearest Dove. Dearest Dove was written using letters from Nathaniel and Sophia Hawthorne, but it was all put together by a woman named Ann Lucas. She's well known on the theater scene here on the North Shore. She's also responsible for our October theatrical productions. Has anybody ever been to those? Yes, yeah, Legacy of the Hanging Judge and Spirits of the Gables. Yes, yeah, they're very good, yeah. If you haven't been, come back in October. They're wonderful. She couldn't be here tonight because of a family emergency, but she's got a substitute, and that's Jen Hurley, also very active on the local theater scene, so we're really happy to have her. The award-winning, if anybody knows, Karen Nascembeni received the Hall of Fame award last week from the North Shore Chamber of Commerce. She'll be reading Sophia's letters. And then Dana Hersey, and if you've never seen Dana, I'm sure you've all heard him on 104.9, or if you remember, like I do, Bedtime Magic with 106.7. So we're looking forward to having Dana read Nathaniel's letters. With that, they should be coming on any moment. So enjoy the show.
Thank you. must tell thee that I love thee. I must be told that thou lovest me. It must be said in words and symbolized with caresses, or else, at last, imprisoned love will go frantic and tear all to pieces the heart that holds it.
My heart is so full. It rises to so high a mark, it overflows so bountifully, that were there not another heart to receive my boundless love, I should feel sad and aimless. I care very little what guise the heavens wear, so complete and sufficient is my inward happiness, so effective a son of my system is my dearest Lord.
Nathaniel Hawthorne was the first great American novelist. His work includes The Scarlet Letter, Young Goodman Brown, The Blithedale Romance, The Marble Fawn, countless short stories, and of course, The House of the Seven Gables. His greatest success came after his marriage to Sophia. His passionate love and courtship of his dearest dove, Sophia Peabody, is recorded in their beautiful letters. Dana Hersey and Karen Nascembeni will read the letters of their early life together for us tonight. I will fill in the events in between, since the letters are not answers to one another. So sit back and enjoy the beautiful letters of their courtship.
If you know anything of me, you know how I sprang out of mystery, akin to not the thing concocted out of the elements without visible agency. How all of my boyhood I was alone. How I grew up without a root, yet continually longing for one, longing to be connected with somebody and never feeling myself. So I tried to keep down this yearning, to stifle, annihilate it, with making a position for myself, with being my own past. But I cannot overcome this natural horror of being a creature floating in the air, attached to nothing, nor this feeling that there is no reality in the life and the fortunes, good or bad, of being so unconnected.
Nathaniel's life was deeply affected by his father's untimely death at sea. Though socially prominent in Salem, the Hawthorne family had not the means to give shelter to Nathaniel's mother and her children. They lived with her family, the Mannings. At times, there were as many as 20 under one roof, and he dubbed it Castle Dismal. Nathaniel's mother was broken by her husband's loss, and she chose to live in seclusion. Her sorrow and detachment from life cast a pall over her children. It was not a happy home.
I love my mother, but there has been, ever since boyhood, a sort of coldness of intercourse between us, such as is apt to come between persons of strong feeling, if not managed rightly.
Nathaniel attended college at Bowdoin, where he met his lifelong friends Horatio Bridge, Jonathan Silly, and Franklin Pierce. He was transformed into a young man who was socially lively and even enjoyed playing pranks. But returning to Salem after graduation, he again adopted a reclusive life.
I sat down by the wayside of life like a man under an enchantment, and the shrubberies sprang up around me, and the bushes grew to be saplings, and the saplings became trees, until no exit appeared possible through the entangling depths of my obscurity.
Nathaniel began writing all day long in the attic. His eldest sister, Elizabeth, worked with him and encouraged him. The Gentle Boy was published anonymously. Elizabeth Peabody, the highly educated and well-connected elder daughter of the Peabody family, came to the Hawthorne family's Herbert Street home and demanded to speak with Elizabeth Hawthorne. She was convinced that she must be the author of the story. Elizabeth told her that the author was Nathaniel. Miss Peabody became a great admirer of his work and may have been disappointed when her invitations to her home resulted in him being drawn to her invalid younger sister. The sunlight never truly entered his life until he met Sophia Peabody.
It was an afternoon in late November, 1837. I had been summoned to the home of Elizabeth Peabody to discuss my literary work. I faced those formidable steps of the house on Charter Street with trepidation. A lovely visit ensued in the parlor, and as the conversation continued, I saw Elizabeth look up. I looked up and saw a woman of such grace and beauty and light as I had never seen. She stepped toward me. I rose. "Mr. Hawthorne, I've heard so much about you," she said. I replied, I'm sorry? Feeling the complete fool, I looked out at my feet, but my eye was drawn upward to her face. She smiled, and my life has never been the same.
Sophia, like Nathaniel, was reclusive, but her solitude was caused by debilitating headaches, not her nature. Sophia was a Peabody, and that gave her the indomitable will to govern and educate herself. She could not do housework or teach as her sisters Elizabeth and Mary did. However, Sophia was determined, despite her ailment, to contribute to the support of her family, and became a sought-after copyist of other artists' works. Sophia was naturally optimistic, cheerful, and determined to live a full life.
All day yesterday my head raged, and I sat a passive subject for all the various corkscrews, borers, pinchers, daggers, squibs, and bombs to effect their will upon it. Always I occupy myself with trying to penetrate the mystery of pain. Towards night my head was relieved, and I seemed let down from a weary height full of points into a quiet green valley upon velvet turf. After tea I lay down, but scarcely touched my cheek to the pillow when the bell rang, and I was just as sure it was Mr. Hawthorne as if I had seen him. I descended armed with a blue odorous violet. Mr. Hawthorne would not take off his coat or stay because he had the headache and an engagement. He looked very brilliant, notwithstanding his headache. He said he was going to Boston next week and should have the little forget-me-not I painted set. I had a delightful night, and this morning feel quite lark-like. What a beautiful smile he has. You know, in Annie's Ramble, he says that if there is anything he prides himself on, it is having a smile that children love. I should think they would, indeed. There is an innocence and purity and frankness of a child's soul in it. He has a celestial expression. It is a manifestation of the divine in human. I have been reading of the ruins of Persepolis. Shall I ever stand upon the imperial palace of Persepolis? Who knows, but when I am dried to anatomy like Mrs. Kirkland, I too may go to the east, and when I go, perhaps my husband will not be as paralytic. Oh, I forget. I never intend to have a husband. Rather, I should say, I never intend anyone shall have me for a wife.
Their affection for each other bloomed in secret. 10 months later, after their first meeting, the Peabodys moved to Boston. Nathaniel began making regular calls on Sophia at their West Street home. His writing didn't pay him enough to support his family, let alone contemplate taking a wife, so he found employment as a weigher and measurer of coal at the Boston Customs House. He writes from his office there.
Wednesday afternoon, March 6th, 1839. My dearest Sophie, I had a parting glimpse of you Monday forenoon at your window, and that image abides me, looking pale and not so quiet as is your wont. I have reproached myself many times since because I did not show my face, and then we should both have smiled, and so our reminiscences would have been sunny instead of shadowy. But I believe that I was so intent on seeing you that I forgot all about the desirableness of being seen. I fear that you were not quite well that morning. Do grow better and better physically. For I protest against any spiritual improvement until I am better able to keep pace with you. But do be strong and full of life, earthly life. And let there be a glow in your cheeks, and sleep soundly the whole night long, and get up every morning with a feeling as if you were newly created. And I pray you to lay up a stock of fresh energy every day till we meet again, so that we may walk miles and miles without your once needing to lean upon my arm. Not that you shall lean upon it as much as you choose. Indeed, whether you choose or not, but I would feel as if you did, you to lighten my footsteps, not to support your own. Am I requiring you to work a miracle within yourself? Perhaps so, yet not a greater one that I do really believe might be wrought by inward faith and outward aids. Try it, my dove, and be as lightsome on earth as your sister doves are in the air. If my little Sophie, mine own dove, cannot grow plump and rosy and tough and vigorous without being changed into another nature, then I do think that for this short life, she had better remain just what she is. I never till now had a friend who could give me repose. All have disturbed me. Whether for pleasure or pain, it was still disturbance. But peace overflows from your heart to mine. I feel myself unworthy of your love. But if I am worthy of it, you will always love me. And if there be anything good and pure in me, it will be proved by my always loving you.
By the end of 1839, Nathaniel and Sophia had begun to refer to themselves in correspondence as husband and wife. They told no one of their engagement and would not be married until 1842.
December 31st, 1839. Best beloved, I sent you some allumettes wherewith to kindle the taper. There are very few, but my second finger could no longer perform extra duty. These will serve till the wounded one be healed, however. How beautiful it is to provide even the slightest convenience for you, dearest. I cannot tell you how much I love you in this backhanded style. My love is not in this attitude. It is rather, it bends forward to meet you. What a year it has been to us. My definition of beauty is that it is love, and therefore includes both truth and good. But those only who love as we do can feel the significance and force of this. My ideas will not flow in these crooked strokes. God be with you. I am very well and have walked far in Danvers this cold morning. I am full of the glory of the day. God bless you this last night of the old year. It has proved the year of our nativity. Has not the old earth passed away from us? Are not all things new? Your Sophie.
January 1st, 1840. Beloved, my heart was exceedingly touched by that little backhanded note, and likewise by the bundle of allumettes, half a dozen of which I was kissing with great affection. Would that I might kiss that poor dear finger of mine. Kiss it for my sake, sweetest dove. If it be not well within a few days, do not be surprised if I send down the best surgeon in Boston to effect its speedy cure. Nevertheless, darlingest wife, restrain the good little finger if it shows any inclination to recommence its labors too soon. If your finger be pained in writing, your husband's heart ought to feel every twinge. Belovedest, I have not wished you a happy new year. Many of them, as many, my own wife, as we can enjoy together. We shall no longer think of happy New Year's on earth, but look longingly for the New Year's Day of eternity. What a God that he has made me capable to know and love you. Does it seem a great while since I left you, dearest? Truly it does to me. These separations lengthen our earthly lives by at least 9/10, but then in our brief seasons of communications there is an essence of 1,000 years. Was it Thursday night that I told Dove would be the day of my next appearance on Friday? Oh, Friday. Certainly, Friday, says Sophie Hawthorne. Well, it must be as naughty Sophie says. Oh, belovedest, I want you. You have given me new feeling, blessedest wife, a sense that strong as I may have deemed myself, I am insufficient for my own support. And there is a tender little dove, without whose help I cannot get through this weary world at all. God bless you, honest wife, your honest husband.
Hawthorne increased his attentions toward Sophia, much to the distress of his sister Elizabeth. She did all she could to break the bonds which united them. Knowing Nathaniel's affection and devotion toward their mother, she intimated that should Miss Hawthorne hear about the marriage, it would dangerously agitate her. She also attempted to raise doubts in Sophia about her physical condition. Sophia had chronic headaches, which had plagued her from the age of 11. Elizabeth suggested to Sophia that she would never be well enough to fulfill the duties of wife and mother.
A dubious morning. I felt rather as if the tempest had passed over and crushed my powers when I awoke. For such a violent pain, while it is on me, gives me a supernatural force. combined with an excessive excitement of all of my tenderest nerves which nearly drives me mad. Yesterday, whenever a door slam or a loud voice made me start throughout in my powerless state, I could not keep the tears, burning tears, from pouring over my cheeks. Oh, how mysterious is this unseen mighty agent. There is evident reason why a murderous instrument should cause anguish. But how is this inward, invisible agony caused? It seems as if a revelation had passed in my head, and that I can no more mingle with the noisy world.
Sophia came to feel that her marriage to Nathaniel was contingent upon her recovery from her illness, and that she believed was in God's hands. Both Nathaniel and Sophia had strong faith in the principles of transcendentalism and in the power of love itself. Sophia grew steadily better. Love was a tonic that no doctor could have predicted.
We are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made, and no one can know how fearfully till they are sensitive in the nicest parts of this wonderful machinery. If I had been nervous in the common acceptance of the term, I think I should not only have been mad, but afraid to move or feel. In the extremity of my suffering, when I was conscious of a floating off of my senses, a resolute fixing of my mind upon immutable, never-changing essence, has enabled me to regain my balance so entirely that I feel as if I had had direct revelation to my own mind of the existence of such a being.
Cheered by Sophia's improving health and eager to marry, he left the customs house in Boston for the transcendentalist experiment at Brook Farm. He invested his savings in the farm, believing he and his bride Sophia would live there together.
Oak Hill, April 13th, 1841. Honest love, here is not poor husband in a polar paradise. I know how to interpret this aspect of nature, whether it be good or evil omen to our enterprise, but I reflect that the Plymouth Pilgrims arrived in the midst of storm and stepped ashore upon mountain snowdrifts, and nevertheless they prospered and became a great people, and doubtless it will be the same with us. I laud my stars, however, that thou wilt not have thy first impression of our future home from such a day as this, that thou shouldst shiver all thy life afterwards and never realize that there could be bright skies and green hills and meadows and trees heavy with foliage, when now the whole scene is a great snowbank, and the sky full of snow as well. Dearest, provide thyself with a good stock of furs, and if you can obtain the skin of a polar bear, thou wilt find it a very suitable summer dress for this region. Thou must not hope ever to walk abroad except upon snowshoes, nor to find any warmth save in thy husband's heart. Belovedest, I have not yet taken my first lesson in agriculture, as thou mayest well suppose, except that I went to see our cows foddered yesterday afternoon. We have 8 of our own, and the number is now increased by a transcendental heifer belonging to Miss Margaret Fuller. She is very fractious, I believe, and apt to kick over the milk pail. Thou knowest best whether in these traits of character she resembles her mistress. Thy husband intends to convert himself into a milkmaid this evening, but I pray heaven that Mr. Ripley may be moved to assign him the kindliest cow in the herd. Otherwise he will perform his duty with fear and trembling. April 14th, 10 a.m. Sweetest, I did not milk the cows last night because Mr. Ripley was afraid to trust them to my hands, or me to their horns, I don't know which. But this morning I have done wonders. Before breakfast I went out to the barn, I began to chop hay for the cattle, and with such a righteous vehemence, as Mr. Ripley says, I did labor that in the space of 10 minutes, I broke the machine. Well, then I brought wood and replenished the fires, and finally sat down to breakfast and ate up a huge mound of buckwheat cakes. And after breakfast, Mr. Ripley put a 4-pronged instrument into my hands, which he gave me to understand was called a pitchfork. He and Mr. Parley, being armed with similar weapons, we all then commenced a gallant attack upon a heap of manure. This office being concluded, thy husband having purified himself, he sits down to finish his letter to his most beloved wife, Dearest, I will never consent that thou come within half a mile of me after such an encounter as that of this morning. Pray heaven that this letter retain none of the fragrance with which the writer has been imbued. Beloved, as Miss Fuller's cow hooks the other cows and has made herself ruler of the herd and behaves in a very tyrannical manner. Sweetest, I know not when I shall see thee, but I trust it will not be longer than the end of next week. I love thee, I love thee. I wouldst thou wert with me, for then would my labor be joyful, and even now it is not sorrowful. Dearest, I shall make an excellent husbandman. I feel the original Adam reviving within me.
After a visit to her beloved at Brook Farm, Sophia longed to tend to her soul's star, who seemed exhausted and earthbound with so much physical labor.
Sunday, May 30th, 1841. My dearest love, the chilling atmosphere keeps me from church today, and as there is nothing in my mind and heart but thee, I may as well think and feel with pen in hand. Since I saw thee at the farm, I wish far more than ever to be with thee continually. I want a home for thee to come to after associating with men all day, where thou shouldst rest from toil under my own ministration. A sacred retreat thou should have of all men. Most other persons would not desire or like it, but notwithstanding thine exquisite courtesy and conformableness and geniality there, I could see very plainly that thou wast not leading thine ideal life. Never upon the face of any mortal was there such a divine expression of sweetness and kindness as I saw upon thy during the various transactions and witticisms of the excellent fraternity. Yet it was also the expression of a witness and hearer rather than comradeship. It seemed to me that quite unconsciously on thy part, it was the assent and sympathy of a more celestial nature. Had I perceived a more particle of even the highest kind of pride in thy manner, it would spoil the perfect beauty and fitness. But there was only thy inevitable superiority which thy true and thorough loveliness could not entirely conceal. I do not wonder that they all worship thee, for nothing is so fascinating as the combination of intellectual greatness with angelic affections. Reverence and love, after struggling in vain for preeminence, is those around thee, are finally obliged to sit down side by side on the same throne at thy feet, and do thee homage with simultaneous movement. O King by divine right, no one can love and reverence thee as does thy wife. In her heart centers the world's admiration, and from its depth sparkles up beside the starry foam of her own separate and incomparable love. How glad I am that this a day of rest for thee. I hope thou art asleep, and thou wilt not even think of writing to me. I wish thou wouldst not write me at all, till thou hast less to do in the fields. Remember this, whenever thou art led to suppose I may be impatient to hear. I had much rather wait than have thee ever rise from thy seat in weariness to send me even a note. Do promise me not at any time to feel obliged to perform this outward ceremony. When it would be a relief or rest, I shall gladly welcome a word of greeting. Dearest, if thou lovest me, never make an effort to tell me thou lovest me in letters of the alphabet. I reproach myself for having so urged thee before, but I was not aware how much thou hadst to do, till I saw with my own eyes.
The separation was painful for both of them. They felt that they shared one soul, and it was being split in two by this separation. They longed to be together.
My best beloved, words cannot tell how immensely my spirit demands thee. Sometimes I almost lose my breath in a vast heaving towards thy heart. It is plain enough that for me there is no life without a responsive life from thee. All my hope and peace and satisfaction lie in thy bosom. For argosies of happiness I have only to cast anchor there. Every thought seems of no value if I cannot share it with thee. Every deed is indifferent which cannot meet thy sympathy. Thou art literally all the world, because where thou art not, there is no world, but a vacuum. Thou art a necessity of my nature, as well as its crown of perfection and voluntary grace. It is astonishing how much more I love thee every day. Oh, how I remember that dream I once had in which my life was represented as a web, with the gold thread passing through every tiny square. I now understand better than the spirit who tried to interpret it. The shining thread was thy love, and gradually thou art become interwoven more and more with me. In the loom of time, what web could ever show a warp and woof so glorified?
Hawthorne became disenchanted with Brook Farm and lost his savings. Mr. Ripley and the owner had not come to any conclusion over the sale of the property, and Nathaniel doubted whether the community would actually flourish. He left Brook Farm and returned to Herbert Street in Salem. His family was glad for his return. Though he still kept his engagement a secret from his mother, now his only thought was to look for a suitable home for Sophia. He wrote playful letters to her to try to ease the waiting.
Salem, January 20th, 1842, 11 o'clock a.m. Truest heart, here is thy husband in his old chamber, where he produced those stupendous works of fiction which have since impressed the universe with wonderment and awe. To this chamber, doubtless in all succeeding ages, pilgrims will come to pay their tribute of reverence. They will put off their shoes at the threshold for fear of desecrating the tattered old carpet. There, they will exclaim, is the very bed in which he slumbered, and where he visited by those ethereal visions, which he afterward fixed forever in glowing words. There is the washstand at which this exalted personage cleaned himself from the stains of earth and rendered his outward man a fitting exponent of the pure soul within. There, in its mahogany frame, is the dressing glass which reflected the noble brow, whose hyacinthine locks, mouth bright with smiles or tremulous with feeling, flashing or melting away, in short, every item of the magnanimous physique of this unexampled man. There is the pine table, there the old flag-bottomed chair in which he sat, and at which he scribbled during his agonies of inspiration. There is the old chest of drawers in which he kept the shirts a poor author must have. There is the worn-out shoe brush with which this polished writer polished his boots. There... That's pretty much it. So I close here the catalog. My ownest, it is by no means comfortable to be separated from thee 3 whole days at a time. It is too great a gap in life. There is no sunshine in these days in which thou dost not shine. God bless thee and keep thee happy and joyful until Saturday evening, when thou must needs bear the infliction of thine honest husband.
When the wedding was a month away, Nathaniel still had not told his mother of his marriage to Sophia. She had such a delicate nature, he was naturally concerned. Finally, he knew he had to speak with her.
Salem, June 9th, 1842, afternoon. Dearest wife, I love thee beyond all hope of expression, so do thou measure it by thine own love for me. Sweetest, scarcely had I arrived here when our mother came out of her chamber looking better and more cheerful than I have seen her this some time, and inquired about the health and well-being of my dove. Very kindly, too. Then was thy husband's heart much lightened, for I knew that almost every agitating circumstance of her life had hitherto cost her a fit of sickness, and I knew not but it might be so now. Foolish me to doubt that my mother's love would be wise like all other genuine love, and foolish again to have doubted my dove's instincts, whom henceforth, if never before, I take for my own unerring guide and counselor in all matters of the heart and soul. Yet, if sometimes I should perversely follow mine own follies, do not thou be discouraged. I shall always acknowledge thy superior wisdom in the end. Seems that our mother had seen how things were a long time ago. At first her heart was troubled because she knew that much of outward as well as inward fitness was requisite to secure thy foolish husband's peace. But gradually and quietly, God has taught her trust all is good. And so thou, dearest wife, we shall have her fullest blessing and concurrence. My sisters, too, begin to sympathize as they ought, and all is well. Mine ownest, I long for thee, yet bear our separation patiently, because time and space and all other finite obstructions grow so fast flitting away from between us 5 days. We can already measure the interval by days and hours. God bless thee. I have no more words, but a heart full of love.
The love of Nathaniel and Sophia had overcome many obstacles: her health, his mother's anxiety, Elizabeth's jealousy, and financial fears. Now the longed-for day was imminent, and all of those who loved them were happy for their triumph.
June 19th, 1842. I marvel how I can be so blessed among mortals, how that the very king and poet of the world should be my eternal companion henceforth. It fills me with an awful beatitude, and I worship God with trembling love. But I am not afraid. Time is so swallowed up in eternity now that I have found my being in him, that life seems all one now, and the remotest hereafter are blended together. In the presence of majestic, serene nature, we shall stand transfigured with a noble, complete happiness. This most beautiful month, so rich in treasures of verdure and fullness, will find us bound by earthly, as long as we have been by heavenly ties. This ceremony is nothing. Our true marriage was 3 years ago.
On July 9th, 1842, Nathaniel and Sophia were married in the home of her parents, Dr. and Mrs. Peabody, at 13 West Street, Boston. The ceremony was performed by Reverend James Freeman Clark. The family was present, but there were very few other guests at the wedding. Nathaniel and Sophia moved to Concord and rented what was referred to as the Old Manse. During their days there, they collaborated on a journal, but also kept their own notebooks and wrote to their families.
Concord, January 4th, 1843. Do you know how majestically he skates? He looks very kingly, wrapped in his cloak, gliding to and fro. Mr. Emerson called him a perfect Ajax. It is an old-fashioned winter in Concord. Nathaniel writes till 2 o'clock in his study. He has written as usual, as no one else can write. At 2 we dine, and by 3 he goes to the Athenaeum and post office, and when he comes back it is near sunset. We take tea early and have a long evening. Then he reads aloud to me, Milton and Bacon's Advancement of Learning. It is a high intellectual exercise to read anything with Nathaniel, because he is so acute and profound.
Everything said in my praise and glory in the foregoing letter is no more than the simple truth.
Idyllic years at the Old Manse followed their wedding. They entertained illustrious guests, and for the first time enjoyed life to the fullest.
There is no language to describe the fullness of my content and joy. My dancing days have returned. I dance before him to the music of the musical box, and he says, I deserve John the Baptist's head. You know, I danced very well once. Now I can better. I have grown very fat and fair, and expect my face to be a full moon shortly.
August 5th, 1842, a rainy day, and I do verily believe there is no sunshine in this world except what beams from my wife's eyes. Happiness has no succession of events because it is all part of eternity, and we have been living in eternity ever since we came to this old manse. Externally, our paradise has very much the aspect of a pleasant old domicile on earth. George Prescott comes daily to bring 3 pints of milk from some ambrosial cow. Mr. Emerson comes sometimes, and has been so favored as to be feasted on our nectar and ambrosia. Mr. Thoreau has twice listened to the music of the spheres, which for private convenience we have packed into a musical box.
We sat down upon a carpet of dried pine leaves. Then I clasped him in my arms in the lovely shade, and we lay down a few moments on bosom of dear Mother Earth. Oh, how sweet it was! We walked through the field and came into an open space. whence a fair, broad landscape could be seen, our old manse holding a respectable place in the plain. The river opening its blue eyes here and there and waving, mountainous ridges closing in the horizon.
September 1st. Mr. Thoreau dined with us yesterday. He's a singular character, a young man with much of a wild, original nature still remaining in him. His ugliest sin. Long-nosed and queer-mouthed, and with uncouth and somewhat rustic, though through courteous manners, corresponding very well with such an exterior. But his ugliness is of an honest and agreeable fashion, and becomes him much better than beauty. Mr. Thoreau is a keen and delicate observer of nature, a genuine observer, which I suspect is almost as rare as a character as even an original poet, and nature, in return for his love, seems to adopt him as her especial child, and shows him secrets few others are allowed to witness.
July 9th. This is the anniversary of our wedding, my dearest love. Our state is one of far greater felicity than last 9th of July. Then we had visions and dreams of paradise. Now paradise is here, and our fairest visions stand realized before us. I have not felt very well for 2 weeks, but it is the very poetry of discomfort, for I rejoice at every smallest proof that I am as ladies wish to be, who love their lords. And thou art so tender and indulgent to all my whims and moans, and dost look so radiant with satisfaction and content, that I feel I could bear joyfully any amount of pain or unease for thy sake. Thou never wast so sweet and lovely as now. Now, as thou sittest before me, I think thou art of priceless beauty. Ah, may our little dovelet look like thee.
July 9th. Dearest dove, I know not what to say, and yet cannot be satisfied without marking with a word or two this holiest anniversary of our life. But life now heaves and swells beneath me like a brimful ocean, and the endeavor to comprise any portion of it in words is like trying to dip up the ocean at a goblet. We never were so happy as now. God bless and keep us.
Una was born on March 3rd, 1844.
Every morning I wake and find the darling lying there, or hear the sound of her soft breathing. I am filled with joy and wonder and awe.
I'm happy to tell you that our little girl is remarkably healthy and vigorous, and promises, in the opinion of those better experienced in babies than myself, to be very pretty. For my own part, I perceive her beauty at present rather through the medium of faith than with my actual eyesight. By the time you shall see her, you will have an opportunity to see her, and how beautiful she is, though. I flatter myself she will be the prettiest young lady in the world.
Here we leave their love story. Nathaniel and Sophia left the manse in 1845. Finances were tight throughout their life together, and they moved many times. They had 3 lovely children and a happy marriage. After much struggle, Nathaniel at last received the acknowledgement he deserved as a writer. The Scarlet Letter was published in 1850 and lauded as a work of genius. He attributed his success to the inspiration and love of his wife.
I believe dove is the true word after all. And it can never be used amiss, whether in sunniest gaiety or shadiest seriousness. And yet it is a sacred word, and I should not love to have anybody hear me use it, nor know that God has baptized you so, that baptism being for yourself and me alone. By that name, I think, I shall greet you when we meet in heaven.
Nathaniel died May 19, 1864. Sophia lived on, celebrating her husband's memory by editing his journals for publication. She died at the age of 61.
I have an eternity, thank God, in which to know him more and more, or I should die in despair to never again know my soul's star.
Thank you.